Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Healthy Innovators Live TV. My name is Barry Shrier, and I'm your host. Every week we bring to you a collection of incredibly interesting and passionate and capable people who are tackling the greatest challenges in society and in healthcare by way of technology and innovation. I'm very proud this week to bring you four incredibly interesting people, and we're going to have a half-hour conversation about what are some of the biggest challenges in society, what are some of the biggest things in healthcare that we need to address, and how is it through innovation and through the adoption of new technologies that we can tackle these challenges. Once again, my name is Barry Shrier, and I'd like to thank our sponsors, Vodafone Business and Barclays Bank Eagle Labs. These weekly TV shows are brought to you by GIANT Health. GIANT is a community of nearly 200,000 people around the world. Everybody whose business is healthcare, technology, and innovation. Please go to the GIANT website, www.giant.health, to learn more. And in particular, we invite everybody to look at the European Health Tech Innovation Week, which we are running from the 17th to the 21st of May. That's 5 one-day conferences in Barcelona, Berlin, Stockholm, Liverpool, and Paris, where we'll be showcasing leading European healthcare technology and innovation, bringing investors together with startups, and showcasing some of the best hospital innovation from all across Europe. So please join us. We welcome applications for speakers, sponsors, exhibitors, and you're also welcome just to buy a ticket and come along. We hope to hear from you. So hello, everybody. It's nice to see you guys. Hello, Peter. How are you doing today?
Very well, Barry. Thanks for having us on the show. It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure. No, really glad to have you on board. And hello, Michael, obviously, and hello, William and Carlos. Really glad to have you guys on board. We're just going to dive straight in, if that's okay. So, Peter, what are, from your perspective, one of the bigger challenges in society, and what are you and some of your colleagues and associates doing to address that?
Well, thanks, Barry. And I think one of the reasons it was great to bring Carlos and Will to the show today is because we're seeing an explosion of investment in the health tech sector, particularly digital health. If you look at the US in particular, Rock Health actually recently stated that over $14 billion of investment deals were made last year, which is a record-breaking year. It's 72% higher than the previous year.
40 billion.
Yeah, really, we just want to invite the conversation around what we're seeing as trends that are really tackling some of the big healthcare issues today. Obviously, COVID has really put that into focus for many of us. I think that there's a bunch of challenges and opportunities that us as innovators and investors in the space can tackle.
Yes.
And I look forward to sort of discussing them with everybody here today.
Excellent. No, that makes a lot of sense. And of course, it's extremely pleasing to hear about that 40 billion in investment and the growth of that. So, William, hello. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And from your experience, what are some big challenges that you guys are looking at right now?
Thanks for having me, Barry, and I'm happy to. So I'm part of Northzone. We're a European US venture fund. We're on fund number 9. It's a $500 million fund, and we typically invest from seed through Series A and Series B. And we're not purely healthcare or health tech investors by any means. We invest in all types of software, really. But one of the more interesting sectors in the last few years has certainly been health tech. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, it's been super important to see if there's any startups that are doing clinically validated software products. And I think to that end, we didn't do a lot of investments the first few years into this kind of health tech cycle. Okay. But now we're starting to see more and more companies. And we actually did our first health tech related investment last year when we invested in Spring Health, which is a New York-based B2B2C mental health startup. I could tell you a bit more about that later on, but I think it would probably be appropriate to let Carlos in here as well. I think they're probably a bit ahead of us in the curve here.
Yes, of course. Hi, Carlos, and really glad to have you on board. Thank you for making the time available. So tell us a little bit about what you guys are looking at and what are your views of big challenges in healthcare and how are we going to address these?
Thank you, Barry. So as Peter said, we're one of humanity's biggest fans, both the company and the larger group of humanity.
Right.
And the reason why we backed them is the reason why we back many companies is that we're trying to get into the very beginnings of a company's journey tackling massive problems, and
Right.
health is one of those areas that has a massive problem. We were the first investors in the fintech revolution, which started roughly around 2010 in Europe.
Nice.
And what we've seen is a similar pattern of that evolution of fintech in healthcare, meaning it's taken about a decade for us to go from like the outskirts of the fintech world into core banking. And I believe we're going to go through a decade's worth of transformation in healthcare from like the edges of like wellness all the way to core data and diagnostic technologies. And I think we're somewhere like maybe a third of the way in.
Yes.
We've done over 20 investments in the healthcare related areas. And so we've broken it down into diagnostic technologies, healthcare data and process management, patient experiences, wellness, mental health. And so, you know, it's an area that we're very passionate about, and we look for the earliest of companies and founders to back.
Nice. Excellent. Oh, glad to hear it. And we certainly need a lot more people like you guys out there. So this is excellent. Michael, we've heard from Carlos that he's one of the greatest supporters of humanity. Tell us more about humanity, please, and how did it come about?
Yeah, and I got to return the love back to Carlos and Reshma and Seedcamp, because they've been amazing on our cap table. And as Carlos said, they have so much experience kind of, you know, ushering these newer paradigm shifts in through these industries. So
Nice.
super lucky to have that. And then obviously big fans of Northzone as well, and Will in particular. Yeah, so humanity, you know, Pete and I kind of started as consumer tech guys. I started a very large, you know, dating site called Badoo, was on the founding team, and Pete started this very, very large travel social network back in the, you know, the beginning of travel, the social network days. But we both kind of encountered, you know, tragic health events that happened in our lives. And as we, unfortunately, everybody on this call and probably most people in the audience, once you encounter those problems, you understand that if you don't have your health, you don't have anything.
Yes.
And so that feeling of helplessness that we felt as entrepreneurs and just as humans, we then kind of parlayed into, you know, doing a deep dive on the science and finding out that these paradigm shifts where people were able to be empowered by this, you know, these new kind of direct-to-consumer health applications and processes was something that we needed to get involved with. And so with humanity, you know, the very short version of that is we're able to kind of measure your biological age, which is your functional age, how, you know, functional your body is.
Right.
And we're using data sets on the back end to basically, you know, create predictive models. And then on the front end, using all the kind of skills that Pete and I, you know, got over the years, basically allowing people to capture all their lifestyle actions and basically, you know, keep engaged with the app so that the app can start to guide them towards doing exactly what will help them actually reduce their age and become healthier for longer. And that power you'll see, and I think, you know, Carlos and Will can talk a lot to this, and I think Spring Health is probably a good example of it, is that power of being able to take these data sets and then get learnings from them and then hand those learnings directly to the user.
Yes.
Is something that we can repeat over and over again in the industry. And I think as Carlos said, over the next 10 years, I think we'll see that become more and more core to healthcare in general. So.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. And obviously, I'd like to join the ranks of being one of the biggest fans of humanity. So Michael and Peter, I'll absolutely love what you guys are doing. Will, from the investor's perspective, is there enough money out there right now for all of these innovations? And if not, what's the challenge?
That's a great question. I think what we've seen within venture capital in the last few years is that the number and the level of investments are increasing. So I would, you know, certainly say so from the outset. And if you just look at the number of investments and the amounts that were made within health tech last year, so I would certainly say so. Yes. I think what is perhaps more interesting there is that it's pretty much two big sectors that are getting the majority of the funding, and it's data and platform, as we call it, right, and well-being and care delivery. And also, if you look at the IPO market, especially in the US last year's, I would say out of the kind of 5, 6, 7 biggest IPOs in the health tech space, 5 of those were within those sectors. So we're certainly seeing more capital being allocated towards these types of companies. But I think more importantly for us VCs, we're seeing a lot of exits as well, which bode well for future investments in the space.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Peter, from your perspective, have you guys found it a challenge on the fundraising side now that we have these investors on the call and they can't get out of the room just yet? What can we do to make it, to grease the wheels of harmony between entrepreneurs and investors?
Yeah, well, an interesting fact for you, Barry, is that we actually closed our pre-seed round essentially on Black Monday, which was the day the stock markets all crashed because of the lockdowns around the world. So, that was quite fortunate. But I guess what we've seen with the advent of COVID really having a huge effect on people's awareness of health and health consciousness is that we are seeing a huge, push towards preventative health and taking control of health, and so every indicator we're seeing on a macro level suggests that this market is really timely. And I think in our particular subsector, if you like, which is really looking at these longitudinal sets and how we can use deep big data and do a sort of a deep data approach to solving these problems, I think you're seeing an explosion in particular. And so I'm very enthused by the sort of feedback we're getting. We're getting a lot of investor inbound interest off the back of people hearing about us and seeing it right on the sweet spot of what many see as the next paradigm of health, digital health, really.
Yes.
So hopefully, if we play our cards right and we continue to cultivate the product and the metrics that we're seeing, we'll have a good sort of choice of which investors to take on. We've been very fortunate, as Mike mentioned, to have 47 investors in our previous round,
nice.
7 funds, some of the top angels in the consumer and digital health world who have really been a bunch of our inspirers and supporters along the way. So yeah, I think that we're just one of many though that are seeing opportunities open up for them now that people are much more receptive to these new paradigms of health.
Yep, excellent. No, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned big data, Pete, and Carlos, I'm just wondering, the theme, of course, of big data has been around for a long time under different guises, and we recognize that it is growing in importance relating to understanding healthcare and population health and that type of thing. Do you see that as a growing element of the overall community where investors are saying, okay, healthcare historically has been rather complicated and an awful lot of it is life science and drug related, but we have issues like technology and famous evaluations or estimations like Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen saying software is eating the world, connections like that, and big data where from outside of healthcare, you have basic principles of technology that are overlapping with healthcare. Does that make sense to you? And where do you see that going in the future in terms of where the biggest opportunities are for investors or where the most important healthcare innovations will come from?
Yes, that's a very good question. I'm going to try to branch it out into 3 different subsets of the question, because big data, I'm going to use that term loosely and tightly within those 3. So tightly, it's kind of where there's a sort of compact set of proprietary data of which you're extrapolating some sort of conclusion based upon that. And we've made an investment, for example, in cancer detection, prostate cancer detection, based on a series of MRIs. And so the question is whether or not those data samples can be correlated with other data samples. The problem is that we have a lot of silos in healthcare. These are not like, it's not like open banking with banks opening up data information. There's a lot more restrictions on this. So what we see, when we talk about big data in healthcare, you're really looking at silos, some of which and most of which are proprietary. So that's one sort of thing. Imagine that as like diagnostic big data. Then you have a more loose interpretation of big data, which is patient records and how do those sit and how do those get treated. And we've made an investment in a company called Alpha Healthcare, which is trying to aggregate that. And with that aggregate data, you can extrapolate ideas from that data. It's not specific to something like cancer, like Ezra might be, but it might be more like we're seeing that for this age group, this is happening, or it's the kind of stuff that you're seeing statistics COVID around, like age groups and race, gender, and all these things. And that's going to be another area of continued development without specifically targeting it in the way that a cancer detection would be. And then the last thing is creating new private data pools. And that's really where it's new ground, super exciting, and lots of legal work to be done. And we backed a company called Peer Medical, and what they're trying to do is say, look, give me all your data about your cancer treatment, for example, and in exchange, we will of course, make it private, anonymized, non-traceable. But in exchange, I will let you know how different people's cancer treatments are affecting them, so that you have a community by which to benchmark yourself and your symptoms and what you're going through. And so that is empowering the patient through the sharing of data, and then thus creating a new data pool, which previously didn't exist, and it doesn't necessarily belong to like a commercial entity or a pharmaceutical.
Right.
So those are like the three different kinds of pools that we're seeing that loosely fall into this category of big data.
Okay. Look, Carlos, that's very, very helpful. Can we do another show just to talk about that only? So
sounds like a deal.
This theme of creating new data pools, are there a number of businesses that are involved in that? This is an area that I'll be open with you, I haven't heard about before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really exciting part. And to some extent, this is what humanity is going to be doing, right? Because like in many ways, they're correlating stuff and then creating a new data set. And so, it's the closest thing that we have to sort of collaboration. Now, the question is, and this is maybe a question targeted back to the founders, is how much that data will then be shared somewhere else? Because, whether regulation forces startups in the health space to share information, or whether it's done through an API that automatically preserves the anonymity of patients. I'd be curious to see what maybe Michael thinks about the future of all the data that they're going to generate that correlates things and how that's available to other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that reminds me of the cartoon I saw last week where there's a school child who is in school at his desk and he's looking up and Mark Zuckerberg is leaning over his shoulder and the child says, my dad tells me I should remove my Facebook profile. And Zuckerberg says, he's not your dad. And so these privacy issues, these data issues, the ownership issues, extremely, extremely important. And Carlos, pardon me for the intermediate joke there, but Michael, could you elaborate on that? This is very important and interesting.
Yeah, and I think so. Before I started Humanity with Pete, I ran the largest consumer VPN in the world, a company called Anchor-Free, and we had about 700 million direct-to-consumer users of that around the world. And as you can imagine, we had some very fun dealings with governments and other agencies as we went. The issue that we got deep in with Anchor-Free, and now we're, I started looking for, there's got to be a better way, because you have this dichotomy of these two things, which we see as different sides of the coin, but they're not really opposing. One is, okay, people's data needs to be private. They own it. It's theirs, and that needs to be sacrosanct. And that's one of the basis of humanity's belief.
Yes.
The other is, hey, if we had all this data, we could save a bunch of lives. If we could just, look at all this data together and figure out what's causing what, and we could save millions of lives, right? And I think if you look back, 10, 15, 20 years, that was always seen as two opposing things that needed to be balanced. But actually with technologies, and like you said, Barry, this is a whole nother show that we can do on this. There's technologies like federated learning and kind of differential privacy. There's different ways to keep the data private, but still be able to model over it to come up with these very predictive, models that then get used. The last thing I would say before we do a full show on it is that most of us, say Humanity, and most of the companies that Carlos has invested in this space, and just really anybody, they want to, as Carlos kind of pointed out, they take a data set and then they kind of model something, and then they kind of provide a product, and they might sell that product from that model, right?
Okay.
And so most of us don't want the data. We want to be able to model on it and then give something of value to someone, right? So there's very few companies that actually make all their revenue or valuation based on collecting data sets. Most of us don't want the data set because it's liability and like all these other things, right? And so if we come up with better models, and we advised the UK government on their open data policy, as Carlos pointed out, like open banking has moved forward so much, but we don't have the same thing in health yet.
Yes.
It's basically most of these, we want to actually just allow for the data to be modeled on privately. We don't actually want the data. And so I think the government has a role to play just by making sure that the regulation is pure, but also in clear. But we also, as companies, can come together right now and we're already talking with a bunch of companies between Humanity and them, like, okay, how can we allow each other to model on each other's data without giving up the privacy of that user?
Yes.
And so I think that's very possible. Those technologies are scaled, so it's like none of us really need to invent that technology. We just now need to apply it to our own data sets and allow for each other to get all these life-saving learnings out of the data. So.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Well, look, this is absolutely fascinating. And I do want to ask you guys all to come back and we can do a whole show, if you're agreeable, just on these data themes, because it is so very interesting and so important. Michael, you just touched on issues of government and policy and regulation. Will, does that overlap with your life at all? Do you say, look, we're going to invest in only one jurisdiction only because of the complexities of healthcare and the differences around the world, or not necessarily?
I don't think so. I mean, as an investor, I think you gotta kind of wear a wider lens and see where there's opportunities. So, I mean, our first investment into this space was in New York, and although we have an office there, we're mostly based in Europe, and maybe our domain knowledge is mostly oriented around that as well. So I wouldn't say that is the case. I think I speak for most VCs when I say that we have a pretty open lens, and we always look for the best opportunities, regardless of what regulations might be in place.
Sure.
But the case might be that the timing is not right, and that's a separate question in its own right.
No, I understand. No, exactly. Will, what are some of your goals for this year? And are you guys looking at additional sectors or areas within healthcare or technology, or do you want to keep the current focus that you have?
I think that's a great question, and just to kind of go back to what Michael just said here. I mean, I think what it boils down to, if you take a step back, is now kind of the first time where we can get actionable insights from this data. And we haven't been able to get that before because we haven't been able to capture that data and put that into context. So with that comes a lot of opportunities, and I think some of them are in preventive health and some of them are not. I think one company worth mentioning that is part of a larger trend that I think is quite interesting is this bio-wearable company out of New York called Levels, and it's essentially a metabolic sensor that they're bringing to the market that it pairs. It allows you essentially to kind of see your glucose levels and how it's connected, to food, exercise, and overall well-being. And it's a constant feedback loop where you get actionable insights that you can actually take action on, which is part of a larger trend that I think is super interesting. And I think this is a trend we're just on the cusp of, to be honest. So.
Yeah, I mean, the wearable space is extremely interesting. Am I right that has perhaps had a few false starts over the years? And I think there's been a couple major collapses of various wearables propositions. Is humanity connected, no pun intended, to the wearables world, or doesn't that feature in your business model?
Well, when we were first looking at what we were actually going to build, our first thinking was looking at potentially launching a new type of wearable, and we were discouraged by some very close advisors of ours who either worked at Apple or knew the space quite sort of intimately, because if you're going to do that, you have to just laser focus on just that. So instead, we really enable existing wearables and ecosystems. So our first version of the service is very core centric to the Apple ecosystem. So if you have a phone, you can connect to Apple Health.
Okay.
HealthKit is very powerful. Most people don't realize what's contained within it. And really, we're just trying to help users distill and activate change in their behaviors based on the information that they're already capturing without them necessarily being aware of it, whether it be their sleep data, their mindfulness through meditation, how much they're moving, what their heart rate zones are. And then you layer on top of that other things like what Will mentioned, such as your blood sugar levels, which can come from a continuous glucose monitor. I mean, if you look at the future gazing, there's rumors of having the next set of smartwatches, including a digital, glucose monitoring service, which in itself will be a game-changing addition to monitoring continuously another very important biomarker of your health.
Sure.
So I think we are really on this cusp where if you are less, say, beholden to one type of wearable, but you can connect through these platforms, these systems like HealthKit and Google Health to actually unlock and then leverage and personalize back to the user and build these models off the back of it that can help other people like you.
Right.
I think you're going to see so many transformations, so many early detection discoveries, so many things we didn't even realize was possible before which will become like what we take for granted now when we go in a car and we go, 17 minutes down the road, and we don't even think twice that we know we're going to be there within give or take a minute, and exactly which route to take.
Yes.
I believe that health will have the same journey for everyone. We'll know which journey to take and what effect it's going to have on us.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it appears as if, of course, the potential for wearables is absolutely vast. But that just leads me, Pete, to have a question, and that is, how do I turn this thing off? It keeps telling me to stand up and breathe. I'm just wondering if you have any technical advice there.
Well, I have the same problem with Siri. Keeps listening into my conversations and tells me some answers to things I didn't need to know the answers to. I think there's some settings in there, Barry, which you might be able to find. I think hopefully humanity will get the balance right in terms of giving you the information that's relevant to you.
Yes.
Just gotta give in, Barry. Just got to give in.
So we've been talking about wearables, and we've been talking about, how do you say it, monitoring people. What are some other big issues relating to the relationship between the patient, if you will, or the customer, so to speak, and their health, and the cost of providing health, and where technology can go in these directions? Carlos, do you have any views on that, or is that anything that you guys are involved in?
Yeah, so I think probably the big thing there, which is also what humanity's working on, is preempting the health issues and providing the patients with visibility of what that could be,
Right.
rather than having it be reactive. So basically moving to proactive health versus reactive health. And humanity's that we have another investment in a company called Thriva, and Thriva is blood diagnostics, which flag up potential issues. I've been using Thriva now for 2 years or 3 years. And,
Nice.
at the very first year I had something that flagged up, and it empowered me to go and talk to my practitioner. Hey,
Wow.
look, I have this situation. And sure enough, there was something, and we validated it with another blood test, and it was sorted out by the end of the year. And so what's really interesting is that prior to these startups working on things that enable and empower the patient, you would just end up maybe a little late, maybe too late for you to take any action.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's extremely interesting. I note that Thriva appears to be doing quite a lot of above-the-line activity in paid-for social media advertising. I hope that's working and boosting your investment, obviously. Tell us a little bit more about them.
Yeah, I mean, when Thriva came out to the market, it was right around that time when I think people were a little bit, mostly investors had been a little bit reluctant on blood testing for obvious reasons at the time. But I think one of the things that really came about with Thriva was this establishment of a connection between the consumer and the laboratories and the practitioners,
Okay.
the GPs directly, rather than trying to build tech to fix all that. And I think the companies that failed prior to Thriva were trying to build all that into one product, whereas there's plenty of value to be built simply by connecting different parts of the ecosystem in a more efficient way, right?
Right.
And the patients didn't have a way of connecting with labs. The labs didn't have a way of connecting with patients. Doctors didn't have a way of talking to patients about their results.
Yes.
And so that's the context in which they came about.
Nice.
And the whole idea was, look, we're not going to treat you on the platform. The idea was, maybe you should take a look at this. Maybe you should take a look at that. Based upon your age, you should probably take a look at this. And I think where humanity's taking that to a different level is that they're and actually I think you guys collaborate with Thriva. It's like you guys connect in a lot of that information, add to that habits that you're doing on a day-to-day, and then at the end of that, you have even more empowerment, which is not only proactive diagnostic, but proactive treatment through things that you can manage that maybe don't require pharmaceuticals, but things and actions that you can take.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's huge, isn't it? And I think that's fundamental for addressing quite literally the largest costs in healthcare for society. Michael, tell us a little bit more about that regarding humanity and this theme that Carlos was mentioning regarding going from reactive to proactive or being preemptive. Are those elements of the humanity proposition? How does that work?
Yeah, and I think just as Carlos said with his experience, doing the blood test with Thriva and then, being able to then become proactive. I think, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of the kind of arm's length, like your health information is over here, someone looks at it and then, you never really see it, or you kind of feel like you just should sit there and not do anything, right? Until someone tells you.
Yeah.
What we've seen, even just with our test users with humanity, is people will see their first kind of rate of aging, which is the way that we kind of encapsulate,
Okay.
how functional their body is, and they just immediately. I mean, one just anecdote is, one person actually moved to a place where they could go. They moved to a different country where they could actually go hiking every day.
Wow.
We had another. We have smaller, and I mean that's a big change. We have smaller anecdotes where people, like, the first time they see it, like they put their phone back into their pocket and they go for a run right away. And,
Wow.
and that's to say that everybody needs to run more, but that's
Yes.
the kind of proactiveness when you get a little bit of information, just a little bit about what state of your health is.
Yes.
People actually are then ready to take an action, especially if that action is quite small and just one step in front of the other kind of thing.
Yes.
And I think there's been a lot of kind of philosophy about people not wanting to do that over the years. But as we see each of these companies, you probably see it with Spring Health, I'm sure you see it with Thrive and others. As we see each of these companies come out, we actually see that their users are quite proactive after they get the information. So I think that's one thing, you were asking before, like what do we want to get out into the world is that these things work. When people get their health information and they're given guidance of what they should do next, they do it. And that's what we're seeing with our test users, and we hope we'll get to millions of users pretty soon. So.
Absolutely, yeah. Pete, tell us more about the test users. How long has that program been going, and what are your goals with that?
Sure. So we launched Alpha in the beginning, summer of last year, and
Okay.
we actually did a bit of a contrarian approach. We only took people on who were willing to pay to be monitored, and we did a bunch of testing on the blood, DNA methylation as well. Fascinating experience. We had a huge interest, strong curiosity, sort of exceeded our expectations in terms of demand.
Nice.
We also got a good sense of what the expectations are from that kind of information, and I guess how enthralled people are by this idea of aging and how they can slow it down or even reverse it. More recently, we've been looking at how we can leverage some of these more scalable digital platforms and technologies and breakthrough science. So not only have we been testing blood and DNA methylation, but we've also been integrating with some of the best partners out there who've developed digital models off the back of these longitudinal data sets. So a company like Geer, which have actually already done a number of papers where they've validated on 100,000 people from the UK Biobank how you can extrapolate from accelerometer sensor in your phone and your heart rate from your wearables, how predictive that can be to your aging as well.
Wow.
So that's really powerful because it means you don't have to necessarily prick your finger or go to a clinic or spit in a tube. You can actually just passively do what you do and get a reading based on what actions you're taking. And I think that's what we're going to see with things like the continuous glucose monitoring on your wearable as well. So,
right.
So I think to answer your question, we're getting a huge demand pool. We're actually a bit overwhelmed in terms of trying to build up, get people in the right sort of stages. We're growing the waiting list. But as Mike mentioned, we're on-ramping people every couple of weeks just to make sure that the product is meeting the needs in the best possible way, and very excited to bring it out to millions of users in the
Nice.
the months and years to come.
Nice. No, that's very, very cool. Can we talk about the theme of recruitment very briefly? You guys are incredibly impressive entrepreneurs and investors, and the theme of recruitment and management obviously has to be in the center of every successful organization. And I'm wondering out loud right now, Will and Carlos, how do you look at that when you're assessing businesses and whether or not to invest in them? Does it matter in the slightest compared to the quality of the IP, for example?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And if we, judging by the vast number of startups we look at each year, if there's one or two or maybe three common denominators, one of those are always that it's a great team, a great founding team.
Right.
And I think what really sets great founding teams apart from any other companies is also their ability to really recruit and attract people that would otherwise never have thought about joining a startup
Oh,
and
really?
leaving their well-paying jobs at Google or Uber or wherever they are.
Yeah.
So great founding teams. It's often teams, to be honest, and ability to recruit really, really great people.
Yes. Very interesting to hear that. And I mean, it certainly makes sense from my perspective and my experiences as a tech entrepreneur. How about you, Carlos? Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that we should probably draw a line in the conversation between what is a healthcare or health tech company and a pharmaceutical company.
Okay.
I think when it comes to pharmaceuticals and going down the path of like drug approvals, I think that's a whole different investment game. I don't think Will's in that game. I don't think we are, for sure. But then health, there's a big range of things that you can invest in there. And you'd be surprised how much of it can be driven by somebody who's just hungry to solve a problem.
Right.
Ed Spiegel, I don't want to overshare his story, but he's the founder of Pure Medical that I told you about cancer. And he had a relative die due to cancer. And the beginning of the company was on the basis of that. And I think what it does is that it brings with it a different industry's approach to a healthcare problem. And
Yes.
I think that is, if you hear Michael's background, Pete's background, they're not like doctors with endless degrees in sort of oncology or whatever. They are practitioners of other tech startup practices and applying fast growth and fast customer acquisition and understanding how people engage with products and how to connect with them and how to make them more empathetic and make them more relatable. And
Yes.
if you bring that know-how to the health world, you can finally democratize something that's been effectively hidden from the end user through complexity.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really good point, and thank you for that. A really helpful clarification, Carlos. So, Pete and Michael, in the theme of recruitment, how do you bring people on board who, exactly like Will said, might have very comfortable, highly paid, stable jobs in larger businesses?
I'll say one thing on the science side, and I'll let Pete cover the other. What we've found is that, in kind of in the theme of what Carlos was just talking about, is when we as kind of consumer tech, like we can get 1 million people to join something, people come into rooms who we've been quite all these scientists, basically top people, George Church and others that have kind of joined our SAB. They've been kind enough to answer all our, in the beginning, stupid questions. Hopefully they're becoming less stupid as we submerge ourselves further in the space.
Yeah.
But what they see in us is we finally want to get our breakthrough science out to people so it can help them, right?
Yes.
They don't want to sit there their entire lives and feel like they've discovered something amazing that could save the world, but only if the world found out about it, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
And so when we meet with them, we're able to very quickly, Peter Joshi, who's our chief science officer, was basically one of these people that our team sat there and read his publications and kind of had a crush on, a science crush on him.
Yeah.
But when we came to him, we're lucky enough that those people then are willing to jump onto our team because they do want their discoveries to get out there, and whatever they know of me and Pete is that we have a chance of doing that. So that's definitely helpful on the science recruitment.
Yeah. No, very interesting.
The only thing
Thanks,
I'll add
Michael.
is the kind of not really specific to digital health or anything like that, more just in general. If you want to build a great culture and a team, it's important that you have a strong mission and vision, purpose, values that you don't just put on a piece of paper and say once, but you live and breathe it, and you everything you do is governed by that, and actually bring on people who buy into that, because it really matters when your back's against the wall and you're really trying to push things in places they've never been going to before. We've also sort of taken advantage of another trend, which or two really. One which is pretty common now is we were remote by design, so it meant that we could hire people who were the top specialist or talent in their respective fields, regardless of where they are based. And
Okay.
of course, we have to have the right processes and systems in place to manage that. But the other thing was having more of a fractional talent model, which is something that is perhaps less talked about, but it's about not necessarily having a team of full-time employees doing everything, particularly when you're a startup and you're growing. You can't afford to have 25 full-time people in your team, but you can have 25 people in your team who each do a very specific thing for a certain amount of time, whether it be 1 day a week, whether it be 1 week every 6 weeks, or 2 days here and 2 days there upon need. And
Yes.
that way you can really get the best possible quality and expertise to help you become, you know, a great business without necessarily having to, you know, spend all of your hard-earned investment monies.
Yes.
So those have been two trends that we're very happy to be at the forefront of, and it's been really helpful for us.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Pete. Really very interesting and relevant points. The way you describe the fractional employment model, I think, is very clever and certainly appropriate for the world that we find ourselves in today with people working remotely. Hey, look, you guys, I'm very sorry that we're not all together sitting in the pub, and I'm sorry I don't have the chance to buy another round and for us to continue this conversation for another hour or two at least. This has been incredibly interesting, and I've learned a lot and found this very informative. Why don't we just summarize over the next few minutes, please, if that's okay? And I'd just love to hear you guys, what are your views about where are we going to be, say, for example, 5 years from now, regarding healthcare and innovation and opportunities for the investment community? What's an example of what you'd actually like to see 5 years from now that we're working right now? Our job, of course, to support you to build that future. So as an example, Carlos, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was wondering if I was going to get picked first. Well, I do actually have a couple of thoughts, or maybe I would call them hopes as to where we'll be.
Yes.
I think COVID has done a great job of making telemedicine more normal. You'd be surprised what you can do remotely. We just backed a company called Tooth Fairy, and it, as the name would imply, it has to do with dental work and pre-qualifying somebody for specific kinds of dental procedures. Wow. And using your phone.
Cool.
And I think that in 5 years, telemedicine will be the first layer. Like, I don't think we will be distracting GPs and doctors sort of in your hometown with that first layer of diagnosis. I think it'll all be telemedicine. So Nice. That's probably the first thing. Because of that, there will be a lot of data that's going to be generated that's going to have to be digital, and that digital information is going to then deal with, and hopefully with some open banking type initiatives, that initial data will then be able to be used by not only the practitioners, but by other people. So for example, we have an investment in a company that helps augment the skills of a local doctor.
Okay.
With areas that they would not otherwise be able to do.
Right.
And so with that data, they would be able to be like, actually, I think this might be a dislocated hip or something else, and then therefore refer to the right person a lot more quickly than the normal process. So in 5 years, I would expect A, telemedicine will become the norm, and B, some of that data that will unlock will make it a lot easier for the whole referral and practitioner movement process.
Yes, exactly. Carlos, thank you. Very important and valid points. And like I said, our job here is to support you guys. So thanks for that, and keen to build bridges with you going forward. How about you, Michael? If you can share with us, does humanity have a vision for the next 5 years, or where do you guys want to be, and what are you building for 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think I mean, honestly, as Pete kind of touched on at the very beginning, like, investment is increasing so fast, and the space is kind of opening up so fast that my biggest wish is that just continues, and I think that wish will come true. Nice. I think with the investments that Will and Carlos talked about, and obviously humanity, I think there's just a tremendous amount of health we can hand directly to users. And so I think I wish each of these companies, and one of our values is to be very open and collaborative. We want to work with each of these companies, with Thriva, Spring Health, and all these people, to kind of accelerate each other to kind of bring this to people, because we're not competing with each other. We're only competing with the fact that we're not helping as many people as we want yet. And I think we can all kind of expand very quickly that way. Yes. So yeah, I just want everything to continue the way it is, and that more investors kind of understand the opportunity, and we continue on.
Yes, excellent. Reminds me of that beautiful theme of radical inclusion, and that's very cool, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. So Will, how about yourself? Where do we want to get in 5 years' time, and what can we all do together to build that future?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're in the job of, right? Looking into that crystal ball. And I think, Carlos and Michael synthesized that really well. But I think key is really to continue investing in health tech in large. Yeah. And innovating on proactive health, really. I think, keeping people away from the hospitals, that is really where, that is where the majority of costs occur. So yes. So the more people we can keep away from the hospitals, the better. But it's probably a long, windy road until we get there.
Yes, excellent. But you guys as investors are playing such an important part in fueling the amazing, intelligent, challenging, risky innovation that entrepreneurs are making. So we certainly are extremely proud of the work that you guys are doing, supporting this incredibly important ecosystem and breaking down barriers and supporting innovators who often have enormous struggles in their journey. So very proud of your contributions. Thank you for all of that. And Pete, any last words? We're just going to wrap up. So what are your thoughts about the next 5 years and what is the future we're fighting to build?
Well, if you just put this into context, the National Health Service spends only 5% of its budget on prevention. The rest is in, treating sickness. And I think that, whilst that will shift, I think there's a tremendous opportunity to bring a huge amount of innovation to the world of both early detection and prevention for ostensibly healthy people who are not even symptomatic, but are essentially like what Carlos was mentioning in the example of Thriver, is people taking control of their own health, people being given early insight on things they can do to avoid any kind of disease, both non-communicable and infectious. And so I think there's just going to be a rapid explosion of innovation in that space, thanks to data, thanks to personalization. And if you really fast forward, look at the space of aging science. I mean, they're already showing in the lab that they can, epigenetically reprogram mice and other types of mammals. So who knows? Benjamin Button might be sooner than you think.
Brilliant. Hey, you guys, I have enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you, Pete, and thank you, Michael. Obviously, thanks, Will and Carlos. I must admit, I was planning on having a pizza and a beer tonight and watching Netflix, but I think I'm going to go for a jog and have some quinoa and kale salad. So I'm very, very, very keen on the work that you guys are doing. We touched on the concept of nudging people, which I think is incredibly important. We talked about things like creating new data pools. Carlos, fascinating subject, and very keen to develop that further and learn more about that. This concept of wearables obviously has had its ups and downs, but I certainly think, joking aside about the annoying wearable that I'm wearing today, that has an unbelievably important future. And the points you guys raised about the requirement to move us from sick care to wellness and the cost, Pete, that you mentioned, incredibly important to recognize that. Also, obviously, the good news that you quoted, Pete, about the level of investment into healthcare and tech and innovation last year, and that trend, in spite of the pandemic, is great news. So on behalf of everybody on the GIANT Health global community, thank you to Will, thanks Carlos, thanks Michael, and thanks Pete. We value your time, and we know it's important. We hope that this episode and this film is useful for you guys. We certainly want to invite you guys to get involved in European Health Tech Innovation Week. We'll talk to you guys about that separately. Of course, my name is Barry Shrier. I've been your presenter today. Thank you for listening. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Vodafone and Barclays Bank, Eagle Labs. And of course, these programs are brought to you by GIANT Health. Please have a look at our website, www.giant.health. And also in the links to this film, which will be available on the GIANT website and on our YouTube channel, we will have the links to introduce you and connect you to Will and Carlos and Pete and Michael. And I'm keen to buy a Humanity t-shirt. So I hope that's an important revenue line for you guys, because that's one of the things I'd like to support. But no, pardon me for being cheeky. I love the conversation we've had. Very keen to develop it further. So thanks, everybody. And looking forward to speaking to you further in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks,
Barry. Everyone.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.